So where does that put us? So we go back to the slides, and I look at what's the effect of an additional 1% in terms of return. So we could have stopped and been very traditional with just stocks and bonds, and we could have had 70% in stocks and 30% in a very low return type of vehicle. But if we start mixing in some of these other vehicles, what does that ultimately do for the portfolio? And it's not difficult to increase portfolio at an aggregate level by 1%. So if you have 10 million and you increase that by 1% over 10 years, then that's 2.1 million. It's a really big number. How about over 20 years? 9.4 million. And then over 30 years, it's 32 million. So as you look at running a portfolio as a business, it's really important to really look at all these different vehicles and try to figure out what works and what doesn't work, where you can increase return without significantly increasing risk. I'll talk about some headlines that were in the Wall Street Journal last couple of days about people that were searching for yield and didn't understand the underlying risk profile of the investment that they bought, and they just chased return. So like Patrick said on the panel, you always got to understand, like, if I'm getting incrementally more return, where's the risk and can I quantify it? So that's really the important thing, and everything really matters. So ultimately you come up with that final allocation. You know, what are my thoughts? And again, this is educational only. We're not giving advice, but lots and lots of mistakes. And there's a saying that more money's been lost searching for yield than at the tip of a gun. So people chase yield in a low interest rate environment, and the people that are selling you these products don't necessarily clearly tell you what all the inherent risks are. And so you just got to be super, super careful and super knowledgeable. And we always like people to commit the different things in writing, like put down in writing all the risk associated with this particular investment. And when something's in writing, it typically has to go through the compliance hands before it gets to you. So it's going to have a higher level of scrutiny. And then ultimately, what should you do? So I am, at the end of the day, a believer that it's hard to invest a significant amount of assets in yields that are very low. So you can use real estate as a mechanism that can create stability and yield, provided it either has low leverage or no leverage. And then you can use some of these other vehicles that you can mix them in with your equity portfolio. So instead of getting that 6.5% return, you may be even able to bump the return to 7.5%, 8.5% on a relatively consistent basis. One of the things that Jim didn't talk about when he was here is his residual income from his real estate. You know, he talked about, felt like the guy at the bus station that had been left behind. But at the end of the day, what is it that you really want? And that's consistency of return and consistency of cash flow. So if I were to bring Jim back here, you know, he works about 20% of the time, and the other 80% of the time he's out running around just doing fun stuff because he's got this residual stable income that comes in. And I think that real estate can solve that particular component in the appropriate level of the portfolio. So really kind of what's the next step? So now we move into planning. And so when we plan and we look at, okay, now we have an allocation and now we have a targeted return, how does it all look? And what is the planning feature? So one of the things that you do is you use simulations, which basically walk you through good markets and bad markets. It runs a large number of manual random trials to see, can you do what you want to do, and how is your money going to fare over a long period of time? So it basically overlays all these really good markets, all these really bad markets, and says, okay, what is the ultimate outcome? And so it just mixes them all together. So it's just, it's overall risk. And then you can even run another analysis based on the current portfolio to say, okay, in a pandemic-like situation, what we just experienced, how much would I go down? It's in essence, it's a stress test. It's that ability to look at, okay, where would I be in the event that these things happen? Remember in the banking crisis, the government kind of said, hey, we need to really stress test these banks because we can't go through another '08 and '09 where we had to come in and rescue the banks. Super, super important thing to do inside your portfolio is just stress test it to see, okay, if various variables happen, how are you going to perform? And so on this particular slide, this would look at different bear markets, the 2013, the '08, the financial crisis. If interest rates go up, how does your portfolio perform under all these different kinds of pressures? Then we look at a case study. So then we say, okay, let's look at a very basic case study with John and Betty and kind of analyze them and then look at what the planning process would look like for them. Well, they are 60 and 58 years old. They got 4 kids and 9 grandkids. And they say, here's our list of goals. Here's the things that we want to do. Donate some money to charity, buy a second house, just really enjoy ourselves, peace of mind. We look at their asset base, and this could be 5 million or 50 million. It just, the math and the way that you go about this is the same. The larger amounts of money, you scrutinize taxes and other issues, because remember, I showed you that 1%. So could you imagine, instead of it being 1% on 10 million, what if it was 1% on 50 million or 100 million? So the precision of the business is super uber critical. And then we look at the financial commitments. We're gonna need to educate the kids. We have our retirement income, which is 200 grand. We have gifts to charity, and total annual liabilities of 280. And then we're going to pull out 400,000 kind of one time. So really, is this doable? So these are the production assets. These are the assets that are the golden goose. These are the assets that are going to generate return. And then these are the use assets, the home, the land in Iowa, and what's set aside. So you're actually, even though they're assets, you're actually living in them. They're not production assets. You're not going to charge yourself rent. And then the liability. We need 6.1% in terms of return. Now I've kind of given you the 4% code earlier, and so this one is 6%. So really, the question is, can we fulfill our objectives? So planning is really this math equation where you look at all the various variables, kind of put them into a program and say, can I do what I want to do, or can I do it based on a particular age when I may want to do something different? This is really good, and this is something that we provide everybody that's here. We call this a hierarchy of priorities. And the reason it's critical is because investors want everything. It's kind of like, I want to lose weight, eat chocolate cake, and have pizza on Fridays. And with investment strategy and process, you can't always get what you want. You can't always have high returns and no risk. You can't always have, I don't want to be involved, but I want to pay low fees. So we see a lot of that over the years, and as we sat down as a group and a team, we scratched our head and said, boy, people are nuts. And they say one thing out of one side of their mouth and they do something completely different. And so we came up with this hierarchy and really made people fill it out and say, rank your order. What's most important? Is it finding the next hot stock? Is it finding the best performing mutual fund? Or is it creating consistent income? And what's magical about this is it creates an order. So when you sit down and create your plan, you have an investment order for you, for yourself, your husband, your family, for your multi-generational family. So 1 is always most important, and then 2, 3, and 4. So if you begin to make decisions, and one of the biggest mistakes people make is, I don't want to sell that because I can't afford the tax. Well, when is tax 100% of the cost of an investment? But tax can become a big number when you have a particular gain. So then, if the order of priority of avoiding tax is number 6 or 7 or number 5, and stability of income and longevity is number one, I'll bring the sheet out and I will scratch out longevity of income and I'll put saving tax as number one. People are like, oh my God, what are you doing? I'm like, well, that's what you're doing. You're not selling a particular asset because you don't want to pay the tax. So these are things and really, really helpful tools because we just oftentimes want a little bit of everything. So when we get into the case study, we look at allocation and assume return. So we've got a 65-35. We've got a assumed return of about a little over 8%. We've got a downside of negative 11. And then we run this illustration that basically says, yeah, at the end of this, we're going to have a $500,000 surplus. So they're going to actually spend down their capital down to $500,000 because they're just depleting capital. They're not so concerned with their heirs. They're concerned with their own individual longevity and enjoyment. And that's another super key piece in this planning and estate planning process is where's the benefit? And sometimes people make these pretty significant mistakes by trying to save tax. So really it's about your enjoyment first, and then if there's anything left over, then the kids. And then if you have a lot of excess, it's okay, how do you transfer that to the kids efficiently without completely messing them up, whereby they continue to be prosperous and productive kids. But then we look at this, it all looks okay, but then we run it into a simulation. And if you look at that bottom right-hand corner, if we can go full screen here, you see that in year 30, in year 22, there starts to be some issues. There's about a 13% probability that you could run out of money in and in the 30 years, there's a 30%. So the question then becomes, is that acceptable? And so to most people, that's not, because we're clearly living longer. You know, medication and just lifestyle and diet and all those things. We're just living longer. So we've got to go back to John and Betty, and they're like, hey, that's not cool. You know, because if we go through a difficult market, and remember, you know, last week we talked about 3 portfolios that all had the same return. The one that had the difficult returns at the front end of the period, you know, they suffered over time, and that's what you're seeing here. So what if we just increased the return, we put more money in stocks and we went 80-20, would that make a difference? And that makes a little bit of a difference over time, but really not much. So then what needs to happen? You need to adjust the goal. So you can either adjust the goal on the front end or kind of roll the dice and see how things go and then adjust it later on in life. It isn't right or wrong. It's just understanding your financial trajectory, understanding the pace of what return you need in order to generate the sort of the distributions that you need in order to fund the longevity of your particular family. So here you just see the adjustments that they made to charities and kids and all of that, and where they wanted the value of their estate to be. They then went to a 60-40 mix, and voila, they dropped from a 35% down to 5%. So planning, and this is a very really basic scenario, whereby we're looking at these different things, and then ultimately the allocation. So then I go back to the rules base. So you have an allocation, you have a plan, you've really run the plan, and you look at it relative to what it's doing, and then you come up with these percentages. And right next to this percentage, you have your actual, and then you have your target, and then the next thing is you have when do you rebalance. It's absolutely critical, because the rebalance needs to be an automated function because of the pace in which markets move. The other thing you want to think about in terms of an automated function is if you're inside of a wealth management shop and they have hundreds of clients, what's their ability to call you? So the automation inside of rebalancing is a very important piece in this financial planning dialogue. So that's really kind of it on the planning side. We're going to take a short 3-minute break, and then we're going to bring on a CFP, and we're going to talk a little bit more planning, but let's just get up and stretch. Actually, let's go 4 minutes. Can we go 4 minutes? We'll go 5. 5 it is.